Okay.
All right. Now I'll redo the share. We're recording. And, just talk about our ideas. So, Mike, you can, you can tell me when you want me to change slide, but you can narrate through it, all right?
Yeah, so, for me, cardio and performance, are you in top cardio shape? And the reason why this topic really came into my mind was, I've been really pushing myself cardiovascular-wise, I think, using, a lot of different methods with the sled, battle ropes, stair climbing, sprints. And I go on a hike with my wife into the mountains, and within the first minute of climbing a trail up a steep slope, I'm winded. So I was getting frustrated. Here I am, my heart rate between resting is usually around 58, 60. My blood pressure is pretty good. It's about 122 over 78. And, I recover really hard. I do intense training with weights, but yet I go on a simple hiking trail into a mountain and I'm like, what the hell's going on with me? So it kind of led me to explore with you two top guys to understand a little more about, cardiovascular and performance, what's going on. Am I missing something that I feel like I'm training really well, but in reality, maybe I'm not. So
Right.
As I'm getting older, cardiovascular is becoming more of my priority, making sure my heart's in tip-top shape, in addition to being very lean and, low body fat. So you guys can go from there. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, and again, we'll run through this and have it and then formalize it. I think it could set the groundwork for the roundtable that we should do on it, because that's a good point. I think it goes back almost to the specificity, which is so fascinating on cardiovascular adjustment. If you're using cardio is non-weight bearing to an extent if you're doing the elliptical, if you're doing the step mill. I mean, while you're weight bearing, you still have some of that's accommodated through the machinery. The amazing thing too, like I said about the specificity, there's an old saying, why are fish the best swimmers? Because that's all they do. And so you look at that, and I don't think personally, that you should have struggled perhaps to the extent that you did. You could have been dehydrated, you could have been tired. I don't know. But nevertheless, if all you did was hike and then you got on the treadmill or you went running or you did the bike, you'd probably be equally fatigued. So I think that overall, there's cardiorespiratory adaptation, but then there's localized differences that would accommodate for why your legs are tired, as opposed to, so systemically you're good. You're probably delivering blood beautifully when you're doing that hike. However, maybe the oxygen extraction is different. There's a lot of things, I think, to really look at with that,
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that Tony hit it right on the head. I think specificity is probably the magic word here. But then also just carryover. Like what can you carry over from a particular activity or training that's going to carry into another form of sport or activity or movement? How much carryover is there for resistance training to sport? And I think that's something that I think every strength coach and every athlete and every coach out there or athletic trainer or whatever is constantly battling with. How do we carry over what we're doing in the strength conditioning gym, the weight training facility, the track and field to the actual sport and or activity? You're talking about not a sport so much as just, basic conditioning. But yeah, I think specificity has a lot to do with that. Like Tony said, how much of that is actually getting carried over. But physiologically, you're definitely, quote unquote in shape, but cardio is a pretty specific thing when it comes to, moving blood, cardiovascular, respiratory exchange and things like that. So yeah, I think this is a great thing to kind of discuss and get our different takes on it.
Okay.
So I am surprised, and don't get me wrong, Mike, it's happened to me that I'm surprised too that you did feel any bit of fatigue to the extent that you did. I don't know what the grade was or how deep it was.
Here's another thing, I don't want to get ahead of me from the PowerPoint, but basically, I always felt throughout my life I'm a slow starter, but then once I get going, I can really maintain my cardiovascular fitness. So it seems like that initial execution of whatever I do is always difficult for me. And then within 5, 10, 15 minutes, maybe probably more towards 15 minutes, I get to get going. And then my body feels like it gets in a better state and I'm not winded anymore. So I don't know what that's about, but hopefully, again, we can kind of explore that a little more today.
Yeah.
I'm thinking two things. One is going to be fuel, right? Talking about where your fuel is coming from. Is your body more fat adapted, and maybe being as lean as you are, and I don't want to use the word restrictive with your carbohydrate, but your diet's very tailored from what I know, and I know you change your diet up constantly, like we all do, and like everyone should throughout life. But I do know that your carb intake varies quite a bit from day to day and week to week and training cycle to training cycle. So there could be some issue in terms of the speed of how fast you're getting warmed up per se, based on fuel sources, where your body is maybe adapted. I mean, Tony, you know a lot more about fat adaptation, and I know that you follow a lot of ketogenic ideas and dietary things that fit your lifestyle, fit your body type and your genetics. Right. So I think that's part of it. And then two, I just thinking about anecdotally about myself from high school and the other athletes that I trained with and fighters and whatnot. Some guys are just mentally and psychologically slower to kind of wake up, from a sympathetic nervous system standpoint, getting everything kind of charged and lined up. I think everyone, there's individual differences.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key right there too, particularly in activities that are less familiar. So in sports psychology, we look at Hannon's model. So that's the, if you will, individual zone of optimal functioning. And what that is saying is that arousal states vary obviously from individual to individual, right? And arousal meaning proper preparation, both cognitively and, as Chris referred to, sympathetically and the autonomic nervous system. So I think a lot of times, Mike, being a slow starter is something it's consistent with many of us. I too. So by the time, even using an example of Chris is running me through mitts and I'm hitting mitts, I don't even start to function properly to maybe the fourth 3-minute round. So what that would tell me as an athlete is going from 0 to 60 under any given circumstance is the absolute worst thing I can do. I would actually need to warm the sympathetic nervous system up a little bit. The rate at which I get excited, excited meaning elevating heart rate, that the cardiorespiratory center starts to activate my nervous system, like catecholine hormone release, all those different things. In better words, slow start is before a fight is an example, or before your walk would need 2 or 3 rounds of a warm up. And those who are under, just to get going, and then that you would almost call that under arousal because it takes more for you to get warmed up. And then you have people that are hyper aroused, right? That are so anxious, burning so much, are so nervous about something that you would actually have to go the other way and calm them down before the event. So I think what it is finding out, for example, optimally, if you were to go from, let's say, a 20-minute walk, just hypothetically, before you did this hike, I guarantee your performance would be completely different.
Okay.
So I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking maybe even just a warm up, just to kind of prime your mind and body connection, to get ready for that. But also, like I said about the fuel source thing, just kind of getting into that fat burning, transitioning to carb burning, during that time.
Which is completely contingent upon your sympathetic nervous system too.
So the importance of
that, right, Chris?
So again, the importance of proper warm up and again proper fuel source depending on what I'm doing. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it has to do with psychological and physiological priming, right? Getting yourself ready to do whatever that activity is, and that could be as simple as doing a breathing exercise to get yourself into that sympathetic thinking or feeling, so your body can kind of tap into like, okay, no, we're working now. This is not rest time. This is movement time. That's why a lot of times it's tough to go from 0 to 60. And I think as you age, that changes. I see that with a lot myself and with the athletes that I work with. I've worked with some incredibly, dynamic, talented, physically talented athletes, guys that literally can roll out of bed and do anything. But as they age, just like everybody else, the warm-up times, I would see them expand. I worked with fighters for years and noticed the warm-up times, even for these super dynamic athletes, start to extend and extend and extend and extend. And a lot of these guys that you'll see in these gyms, especially the older athletes, they warm up for 45 minutes to an hour before they get into doing what they're doing.
The warm-up becomes the workout.
The warm-up becomes, for a lot of it. And it's, I think that changes a lot of, again, talking about fuel sources, I think we have to adapt as we get, because if you're just a complete carb burner and you're an explosive guy and you warm up for 45 minutes, you're toast before you start. Right. So like you kind of have to adapt your eating and fuel sources to coincide with what your body needs to do in order to get ready to fire, that priming.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that was right on. And I'm only laughing, Chris, not because it wasn't substantive, but that because I need a 45-minute warm-up for a 5-minute event.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So next slide, Tony. If you want to go to like objectives today, I wanted to kind of cover with you guys, discussing the cardiovascular difference among sports and hobbies, understand what determines cardio fitness, which we kind of already started to relate to, understand how we measure cardio fitness in the exercise science world of teaching, the importance of nutrition and cardio fitness, as Chris kind of just mentioned as well, and just kind of exploring a simple program for overall cardio fitness. Next slide, Tony. If we see here, previous thoughts on cardio. As you were saying when we were younger, in college, first when I was training hard for wrestling and, powerlifting and all this, cardio to me was to bring you to a state of the bodybuilder being super ripped. Cardio was really non-existent in the younger ages, really just kind of doing the athletic events and so on. And for me, I always had this, misconception about, if you did cardio, you couldn't build muscle mass and you were going to look like a marathon runner and be thin. So, now, kind of moving forward, I understand obviously there's many factors that are obviously false and obviously going to contribute to, you can be an elite cardiovascular phenomenon and still build tremendous amounts of muscle as an addition, depending on other factors that go inside with that.
Yeah, that's agreed. That's agreed, Mike. And I think that, again, if at the extreme ends, you can never have, right? You really should not have integrated biomotor training to a large extent. So, for example, the extreme end is throwing a shot put. Okay, and if you're throwing the shot put, I mean, how much cardiorespiratory activity do you need? Do you want to do some low endurance work in what your off season is? Fine, but your event lasts 2 seconds tops, and all you need is power and strength. Okay, so I have no problem with the argument there that cardiorespiratory would be, training would be a disadvantage. If you're running marathons, extreme powerlifting, not weightlifting. Extreme powerlifting is going to be a disadvantage probably because structurally it's going to tax you too much and far beyond the extent that you would need to improve your marathon running. But everything in between, the athlete in conditioning, look what Chris does. Chris does everything. And that's if you're after one element, excelling in one biomotor quality, then I would agree, heavy strength training or heavy cardio at the extreme level might be bad. If all your sport requires is one quality. But what makes boxing so tough, and I'll let Chris elaborate on it, is you friggin' need everything. You need strength, you need localized muscle endurance, cardiorespiratory endurance, coordination, agility, speed. And that to me is a real athlete. Yeah. But so anyway, the absence of cardio to me for most athletes would make them incomplete.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a transition of realization when it came to athletes and sports. I obviously came from a fighting background, from martial arts to wrestling to kickboxing to boxing. All sports where there's not one motor ability that matters more than anything else, right? Because you can be everything. You don't have to be fast to be a good fighter. You don't have to be super strong to be a good fighter. You figure out, because there's so much skill involved, so much strategy involved in the sport itself. And it's also very, very endurance based. So having that gas tank, having that motor is really, really important for any fight sport, like Tony said. So that comes down to, fighting being very specific. So that's what I always thought about. Then once I started working with other athletes, and I was working at Stony Brook University, I had 500 Division I athletes that I was helping with their nutrition. And to see all the different sports and the motor abilities that were necessary for the different sports, I had to learn every sport. I was literally going to practices to watch female softball players and volleyball players, baseball players, and realize that their sports have such different demands. And that's where I can see what Tony was saying. It's like, all right, at the extreme level, baseball player, who needs to have explosive power, rotate his hips, turn that ball over, turn that hip, turn that bat over, and crack one out of the park, and then needs to sprint down to, you know, the first baseline. That guy doesn't need to do long distance cardio. That guy doesn't need to, it's going to take away from that his ability to generate force and be explosive. So that was the stark realization for me that, oh, these are different things. You know, fighting is more closer to survival, where you need to be good at everything, like Tony said, than sport is, you know, in other sports. And I think we always think of athletes, and we were like, oh, athletes, we think of sports. But I think of athletes, and I think of nature. I think of animals in the wild. Those are athletes. You know, those guys, the you know, wild animals. That's what I think of when I think of a fighter. That's what you need to be. You need to be fast. You need to be strong. You need to have endurance. Because at the end of the day, every contest is a fight of attrition. So understanding that optimization and specificity are different things. Yeah. Right. If you need to optimize your human form and your human body to be good at, you know, everything, you got to do everything. Yep. My favorite thing to say is like, what's the best way to get better at boxing? Guys ask, what's the best way to get better at conditioning for boxing? And I say, box. You just got to box. You know, how do I get better at running? Run. You know, how do you get better at hiking? Hike. Right. You know, a lot of that having that base conditioning and being able to just go out there and do that and have your body accustomed to it, I think is really important.
Okay. Next slide, Tone. So we kind of just answered this, kind of back to my question.
Touched on that, right? And so, great slide too, Mike. Is that Jean-Paul Sigmarsson?
Yes. So
pulling up.
So the point of this was we were talking about, again, we see, you know, tremendous conditioning from Chris Algieri up in the corner, world's strongest man pulling a couple ton plane, and then we see marathon runners on the side. So it comes back to your point where we're saying, you know, performance and cardio really comes down to the specificity of what you're training for.
Exactly.
And that's a pretty good spectrum of it too. You know, you got the world's strongest, you got a marathon runner, then you got a fighter. Exactly. You know, so you got kind of like the whole trifecta of what Tony was speaking about in terms of at the highest level, you know, doing that's going to hurt this. But if you're in the middle, you got to kind of meet in the middle, and you got to do both, if not everything.
Since we're building on this slide, a quick question came to my mind. So, Chris, if we took, say, world's strongest man, you know, Thor Bjornsson, who just kind of, you know, is the epitome of all power right now. It's the world record in deadlifting. And he's going to sign on now to fight Eddie Hall in a boxing.
I've been following this, yeah.
So I myself, you know, I like to box since I was 8 years old, and I noticed when I first transitioned back into boxing with you guys, you know, my stamina was off. So could we take, you know, Thor and then make him become a boxer? How long would the adaptations take, do you think, before we start seeing improved endurance? Because he's a big man, so his muscles are built more for, you know, that high, fast twitch power performance, moving heavy weights, and now he's going to learn to fight. So he's obviously going to suck wind tremendously. I mean, how long does these adaptations occur? Does it take? Is it individualized? Is it more of a, you know, what goes into that when you're training with these guys?
Personally, the answer, I don't think he's going to be able to transition in terms of that at all. He's got 20 plus years of powerlifting training. His body has been conditioned to that. I think it would probably be detrimental to him overall as the athlete that he is, and also, I mean, he's a personality and actor now. He needs what he is to say that. I think boxing is going to hurt all that. The tremendous amount of conditioning, what he would need to do in order to mechanically get his body into the position to punch correctly. It's not enough time. I don't know when they're fighting. I would imagine they're fighting within the next year.
Yeah.
There can be some adjustments in terms of their metabolic conditioning and whatnot, but I don't see a big transition happening. If I was his trainer, I would train him to be what he is, strong and fast for a very short period of time. Knock him out or you're going to lose. That's how it's going to be, because Eddie is actually a great athlete. Eddie was a competitive swimmer. He is a very, very athletic guy. So that's a tough matchup, even for Thor being a bigger man. And I've watched some of Eddie's training videos actually for what he's doing for his boxing training, and he's still doing a lot of weights, which I thought was interesting. Big carryover is not going to be great,
right?
But I have seen him on the mitts and have seen him punching and doing certain things. But I just think with all those guys, mechanically, the things that happen, this having a strong bench press and having a punch are two different things. It's very easy. A lot of guys when they're punching, especially when they're used to strength training, is they'll drop their hand to here before they punch because they're used to delivering, pressing power from down here, not from up here. And that mechanically changes things a lot. And also, obviously, from a boxing perspective, defensively leaves you wide open and is a telegraph to the punch. But with those guys, I don't think it's going to matter.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. Think of the multitude of mechanisms that you need to train. Okay, I've changed. Forgive me. The motor cortex, the rate at which the nervous system is. I'm not saying he can't throw. I'm not saying these guys are not going to throw a few good punches. That's not what I'm saying. But to your question, Mike, how long would it take him to become a boxer? If you look at the phenotype and the genotype and phenotype expression now of Thor, after watching him on that deadlift, think of the years of permanent epigenetic and phenotype expression that have occurred there. So now you got to change motor patterning, cognitive processing, reaction time, down the rate at which the nervous system fires. We're talking to the extreme in order to change him completely, right? Firing patterns. Things have to change in the spindle, in the Golgi, at the muscular level, at the cross bridges, and the fiber type. I mean, there's so many variables here that you would really have to change in order to make him extremely successful. So we're not talking about getting him to throw a few punches against Eddie. I don't really know much about Eddie, and I only watched Thor do that deadlift because we're all under quarantine or even 1,100 pounds. But earlier, when we were talking about the specificity of adaptation, he's at 6'9", 450 pounds. His heart is not proportionately as bigger, like his heart may be 15% bigger than mine. His body is 35% bigger than mine. So he's not well prepared if you're taking and you want to change what this species he has made himself into something like what Chris can do. Now, from a pure perspective, yeah, Chris is right. Get him to throw a few good punches. Make sure they're accurate because you ain't going to be throwing them for long. But I think there's a lot of times when we talk about adaptation at the elite level, there's a multitude of mechanisms that have been created, adjusted, and perfected so that Usain Bolt can now run a 9.59. And so to take all those mechanisms and completely retrain Usain Bolt even into doing an event for 6 minutes straight and excelling at it would be a lifetime of work. He probably wouldn't have been, Thor might not have been all that good at boxing. Maybe he would have, I don't know. But my point to it is maybe genetically he wasn't primed for that, and maybe he would have been a good wrestler. Perfect example, right? So, I mean, reversing 20, Chris said it, 20 years of training, 20 years of specific adaptation, boy, and then when you're not 20 years old, it may never, I don't know if you can do it.
So I don't know how they're not going to get hurt, either one of them. I mean,
maybe hopefully they have some headgear on.
but even I'm even talking about them hurting themselves, like in terms of their mechanical muscular firing ability, how to not tear muscles. Those guys are literally meant for doing one explosive thing. Boxing's not like that. You gotta be loose. You gotta be fluid. You gotta have that snap on those punches. Those guys generate so much force. They get hurt all the time anyway. They tear tendons and when they're not doing things that are fast.
Right.
So that's the issue that I thought about when I thought about these guys and watching them train. I'm like, I would be surprised if nobody hurts.
Good. So a lot to undo. So a lot of years of training, overcoming mental, capacities to the muscles, and refiring the programming of the system of the motor cortex is going to take a lot of work, like you said. Okay, next slide, Tony. So now I guess you could start this one, Tony. Like, how do we test cardio fitness? In the laboratory, there's different methods that we use to bring athletes in. Can you elaborate on some of them?
Yeah, and I think we know, Mike, that a lot of times too in sports. Maybe less boxing, but MMA is an example. You will see a lot of people discuss energy systems and the specificity, and they'll talk about the fact like VO2 testing, which tests maximal oxygen uptake, the amount of oxygen, obviously, not only that you can take in, but use. That's extremely important.
What are some good numbers Tony, for that?
What's that, Mike?
What is a good number for VO2 max if we're testing?
Oh, well, so you can range, and so you start getting to upper 50s, low 60s, you have a good VO2, right?
Yeah,
you have a
really
good VO2. At the extreme ends, probably most Americans being so deconditioned, male and female may be in the 30s, that far down.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you'll have some guy from Norway, who's a cross-country skier, who will have a VO2 of 96 milliliters per kilogram of body weight in a minute.
Which is absolutely insane.
Right.
that's an alien number.
Yeah. It's a guy who's a head, 2 lungs, a heart, and a pair of sneakers. That's all it really is. Okay.
Right.
But so that means the guy can take in, so for each kilogram of body weight, an extremely large amount of oxygen, and not only take it in, but utilize it. So you're not just talking about the capacity, that tidal volume increases and how much oxygen you're getting into the lung increases by expanding your breathing and increasing breathing rate. The key thing is there are genetic components to this, because you have to have a preferred fiber type to optimally extract that oxygen, utilize it, metabolize it, make ATP, and so forth. But generally, to this day, it's the VO2. And a lot of times in MMA, somebody will say, well, I don't need to know their VO2. And I get that, because the integrated, if you will, bioenergetic demands may not be best represented by a maximum VO2. But the reason why VO2 testing, in my opinion, is so valuable is it tells us what kind of athlete we have. So I know that, okay, Chris is going to have an incredible VO2. So if Chris came, hypothetically, or someone like Chris comes to me and goes, Tony, I'm thinking of transition into MMA. My VO2 is 68, 70. Well, one thing I know I don't got to worry about is the systemic cardiorespiratory capacity. So that may help dictate for me how I may train him. I'm also going to know that not always, because there's athletes that have a high VO2 that are explosive, extremely explosive, but that's not the common. So the wonderful thing about it is it tells me what I'm dealing with. It doesn't matter if there's a relevance to the sport itself, right? A vertical jump has little application to MMA. I mean, the only time vertical trajectory is not an advantage unless maybe you're throwing a high knee or occasionally a Superman punch, but generally anytime you move vertically in a fight, it's lost time. It's not increased time. But you'd still like to know if your guy can do a 36-inch vertical, wow, this dude has some power. So my point to it is testing cardio fitness and VO2 in this example, Mike, or doing the testing we do is not so much that it's relevant to the sport. It's giving us data on who we're working with and what their biomotor qualities are, which one is weak and which one is strong. So any form of testing can hold value.
Okay, question for you. Sorry, Chris. So the normal way we test this is usually putting an individual on a treadmill, like we see in the slide here, or on a bike. Has there ever been studies actually looking at sport-specific, VO2 max, like you're actually putting them, say, if we're going to use MMA as an example, getting them into their match, and then kind of, I don't know how the calculations would be, but able to see, is there a better VO2 max to their, like you brought up the case of, specificity, relationship to what they do. So we get on a treadmill, we see they're actually high VO2 max, but maybe they get into their sport and then maybe they're not so good. Is that true to say, or can we prove that?
I've actually brought that up to the guys down in South Florida, the guys at Nova Southeastern, Dr. Corey Peacock and Dr. Jose Antonio and Dr. Tobin Silver. I brought that up because some people just aren't runners. And you take a guy and you put him on a treadmill and test his VO2 max. You might get a number or a value that's not going to be indicative of their actual true conditioning. But there's also Wingate testing, which is on a bike. So if you're not a runner, you can do a Wingate. Wingates suck. Someone doing them. Like I've done all of these things. I'm a good runner, so testing my VO2 on a treadmill doesn't bother me. And I've done it on a Wingate as well. They're different values, but there is a way to translate them. And I brought up the idea. I mean, is there a way we can kind of figure out either a bag work routine that we could do in order, but it's just, there's a lot of confounding, factors and variables. So I agree 1,000% with what Tony said in terms of it's a number, it's a value. It gives you an idea of what kind of athlete you're dealing with. but it's by no means end all or be all, especially when it comes to fight sports. But I think it really carries over to everything, because there are certain guys. I mean, come game day, whether you're in shape or not, some guys just don't get tired. You know, they've got a psychological advantage and a will to win and an ability to dig down certain ways and psychological factors that can make a difference. When I look at VO2 max values and testing, what I really care about if I'm looking at an athlete is fuel sources. You know, where I keep bringing it back to fuel sources, because that tells me, again, like what Tony said, what kind of athlete are we? A fat burner? Are we a carb burner? When do they hit those zones? At what heart rate? At what heart rate do we transition from burning majority of fat for fuel to carbohydrates as fuel? Because that can be an indicative point, because it is a point of that training, because that can change. VO2 max is going to increase during camp, and then guess what? It's going to go down as they cut weight. So that's another factor that a lot of people don't think about when they take a VO2 max or testosterone at the beginning of camp or middle camp. It's going to change throughout. They're all transient. So your best VO2 max is probably not going to be on fight night. You know, it's probably going to be earlier in your camp, maybe not in the beginning, maybe closer to the middle or closer to the end. Yep. But it's going to change. And again, that doesn't necessarily parlay into it being in shape on fight night. But for me, when I look at VO2 max testing and the values, again, I'm looking at where we are in terms of macronutrient distribution of their diet based on what kind of workouts we're doing at that time in the beginning of camp. Are we doing more explosive stuff? Are we doing more strength stuff? So that's gonna affect how I feed myself or I feed my athlete, more so than being like, okay, well, this is going to be a cardio fight, you know? So I think you got to use those values, any kind of lab measurements, to your advantage for that point in time of training, and not as an end-all be-all.
I'm going to throw a controversial question at you guys. So we see a lot of strength coaches now, in between sets, they're doing something I think is pretty ridiculous, is holding their breath. What are they trying to elicit, and what are your thoughts on this process?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Chris on that. And now there's more research coming in, and you know, it's mostly largely, I think, buffering capacity, and you know, and I'm going through the data. There's limited data on it right now, and I think we see that. My question is, I would be far more concerned, because there's legitimacy to this, Mike and Chris, and you both understand it better than I do.
Right.
I would be, particularly structurally, where I suffer, and I need to see someone like you, because Mike, that is, structurally, my breathing is not optimized right now, right? So I would be far more concerned about augmenting performance through maximizing breathing efficiency, and then I would be through manipulating either the presence or absence of oxygen. Because if that condition is not going to be recreated within the fight itself, I would rather spend more time on focusing, and you guys know, and Mike, you know this, I think some of my wind sucking does not come from the fact that I'm not in optimal cardiorespiratory conditioning for certain skills. It comes from structurally right now, my breathing isn't optimized due to imbalances muscular-wise and tight muscles. So right now, I don't have a large place for that in fight sports. I don't see the purpose in it, because I don't think the buffering capacity is one example, is where we're going with that, all right? Building up lactate quicker and having the ability, because of oxygen deprivation, to buffer that and augment the lactate shuttle and all that. I'm not right now convinced on it. Doesn't mean that I won't see more research or I would not try it, but I'm not using it. So Chris, as a fighter, I'd love your perspective.
I think the whole thing that you said is, you know, mechanically, structurally in fighting, to make sure you're optimally working with your muscles correctly. In all fairness, though, in other sports, such as swimming or becoming like a recon Marine or Navy SEAL, you know, they practice, obviously, staying under the water for prolonged periods of time to obviously increase what? What are they trying to accomplish with these, you know, swimmers when they're trying to increase lung capacity, the ability to hold their breath, obviously? But what are the difference between fighting and, say, a swimmer who holds their breath and trying to improve that? Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, I was going to say, I use swimming as cardio and for my sprint work at times. And one of the reasons why I like doing that is because of what you just said, Mike. There's breath holds, and there's being in control of your breathing. And I think it comes down to, and this is where I think actually the holding of the breath thing can actually have some benefit, is you're conscientiously breathing. So you're connecting your mind and your body to the act of your breathing. And this is something I've been doing for my athletics my entire life. If I'm really gassed or I'm really out of breath, I am really thinking about my breath. I'm thinking about breathing in. I'm thinking about holding it. I'm trying to get as much oxygen as I possibly can. And whatever kind of mental edge that gives me, I'm not sure what it's doing physiologically.
So would you say, Chris, you're trying to maybe make a better connection with controlling your heart rate, and then not too much breathing? So we're controlling our heart rate, which has a greater effect on, again, delivery of blood to your systems, such as your muscles, your organs, and so on, being better, physiologically beneficial to you to do that, as opposed to maybe people have this misconception we're just trying to hold our breath and that's going to make us carry action better. But in reality, maybe like you said, is you're getting that mindfulness into the controlling of, say, your heart rate, and heart is the organ that pumps blood out to your system.
Perfect segue, Mike. It's exactly what I was thinking about in terms of that mind-body connection with my breathing, because you can't control your heart without thinking about your breath, and vice versa. So, and that was when I was saying, as long as I've been training, part of my training has always been heart rate monitoring and relation to breath. So I'm breathing in order to watch my heart rate go down, to get it down, because I know that's part of my recovery. I base all my fitness level not on VO2 max, not on these different things. I base my fitness level on what my recovery is in between the rounds of the sport that I do. I fight for 3 minutes and I have 1 minute off. If I am dropping 20 beats around a rest period, I'm not in shape. That's the only number I need. If I'm dropping 40, 50, 60 beats of my heart rate in the 1 minute rest, I'm in shape. I don't care what your numbers say on any of those other things. If I can fight hard for 3 minutes and then drop 60, 70 beats, in that minute time, I'm in shape. So, and a lot of that comes from my breathing in between rounds and focusing on bringing down my heart rate so I can bring it back up during the action.
Yeah. Mike, can I add one more thing? Because that's perfect. Chris said, most athletes are holding their breath. They don't know they're holding their breath because they're not breathing optimally. Right. Yeah. So my point is, I don't really have anything against, doing some work and holding breath in between, if you will. But to Chris's point, breathing itself is an art, and it's a skill that has to be optimized. Right. So a lot of times fatigue is already further induced by improper breathing patterns. So my focus is generally on how do we optimize breathing during competition than it is further holding breath, because a lot of fatigue, not a lot, but potentially a percentage of it is already related to not breathing in an optimal manner. So in essence, that lactate that may build up, or hydrogen, or the absence of oxygen, is already being augmented because oxygen intake may not be maximized through perfect or effective breathing. As Chris said, he's mastering the skill of breathing. So it's all good. If holding your breath teaches you how to breathe more effectively subsequently, okay, wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wonderful. But I would argue in a 3-minute fight, particularly those that haven't worked on it, have in essence, to some extent, held their breath because they haven't maximized their breathing capacity. And that in itself is further inducing fatigue already. So I would be first concerned about, optimizing breathing during competition, if you will.
And that was my whole point for that question was, I think people have this misconception about, holding their breath and they're going to improve cardiovascular performance. In reality, it's what you and your Chris just elaborated to. What's more important is being mindful in your breathing, structurally having a proper mechanism of breathing through your diaphragm, and controlling the heart rate mechanism is the thing you want to understand, taking that home. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, let's prevent fatigue, not induce it.
Right. Next slide.
All right.
So kind of you mentioned this, Tony, about, and you speak heavily on this, and I'm actually in a big agreement with, again, can body type determine or affect cardiac performance? So again, for me, I'm not a true mesomorph. I think I'm more towards an endomorph more, but I feel like for me, maybe I have more physiological capacity of the type 2 high performance fiber, where I'm fast twitch dominant. And maybe that's why it takes me a little bit more. I have a strenuous time getting that cardiovascular performance out of me until later in the time when I'm doing a sustained amount of cardio. What can you shed light on into that, into my thoughts?
Well, I think unequivocally, I think that, the type of cardio matters, right? So a lot of times people will say to me, I had this discussion the other day when someone was asking me, still about road work, okay? Road work for fighters, and people will condemn that. First of all, if you're a boxer and you're on your feet for 36 minutes, there's legitimacy to road work. And two, if you're a boxer and you're physiologically, biomechanically, your genotype is properly designed, you're going to have light lower extremities, not weak, just leaner. You're going to have narrow hips. You better, because if you're not, you got big legs, big hips. You already weigh too much for your height. You're out. Okay. My point to that is that body type can affect not only cardio, but the type of cardio in which the individual can excel. So somebody like me working against gravity with a lot more body weight is going to be a little bit different and probably harder for me than it's ever going to be for Chris, without question. Now, can I get on a mat in horizontal plane? Can my my cardiorespiratory capacity excel more and manipulate my body where I'm not working as heavily against gravity, such as running is? Absolutely. I think body type doesn't just affect cardio performance per se. It affects the type of cardiovascular demand in which somebody might be more preferred to. So for example, Chris is going to have just as good wrestling cardiorespiratory capacity as I, but I may be able to equal his cardiorespiratory capacity in wrestling, but I'm not going to equal it in running. It's just not going to happen due to the load, my biomechanical efficiency in a short gait. So unequivocally, yes, I do think it impacts cardiorespiratory capacity. It is not to say, Mike, that people who are endo like us or endo-meso aren't going to, we're just not winning the marathon, period. It's over. But
for the record, I'm not winning the marathon either. I'm not ecto. People might think I'm ecto because I'm thin. I'm definitely meso. And my genetic testing has shown that.
Yeah, no, but you'll finish it.
Right.
Yeah. You can finish it. So, just closing on that note is, in order for you and I to have the ability to perform in certain events, we're going to have to rely on a multitude of mechanisms. Yes, we're going to have to improve oxygen extraction. We're going to have greater buffering capacity, right? We're going to, and so we're going to have to, in order to have endurance in wrestling, as an example, we might be okay and we'll accommodate that. But certainly our body type is not going to lend itself to cardiorespiratory activity. Particularly, let's look at things where you and I, built the way we are, have to locomote vertically. That's a lot of weight going up. Okay, if we were in a sport, we were constantly going up high and then running and throwing the basketball. It's not going to work very well for us.
So we do know, though, through training mechanisms, we can alter like someone who's a meso to become a little more of a type 1 fiber type, like an ecto, if we trained for it. Yes?
I'll close on this and let Chris speak. Well, certainly we could acquire more. So along the continuum, it's pretty incredible. And Dr. Andy Galpin shows this, right? There are many subcategories of muscle fibers. So we'll just go type 2, type 1.
Right.
And then in between, there's a host of, qualities. But the funny thing is, the less you train, actually, the more hybrid they are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
really?
Because you're doing nothing. So they're kind of sitting there waiting to go, which way am I going? Am I going to strength or am I going to? But certainly if you and I were pure type 2, obviously that doesn't exist, we could get more qualities and we could move ourselves to be better inclined. So we would move down this continuum closer to the type 1. Maybe we would get some more mitochondria in a type 2. We would increase the intracellular myoglobin. We would increase the intramuscular triglyceride storage, but it still wouldn't have the same capacity as Mr. or Mrs. type 1, and who's already inclined to really excel and genetically designed at that event. we will definitely increase the necessary qualities, Mike, and we'll get through a certain type of event like a wrestling match, or, you know, even a boxing match. But at the elite level, we're not going to get there. We're just not. We can't push it that far down the continuum.
Yeah, I think Tony, I mean, you put that perfectly. I mean, I think that's definitely body type matters. You know, and we have a nice spectrum of people right here. I feel like Tony is a true endomorph. He's super explosive. And even just from a dietary standpoint, I keep pumping in with the nutrition. Like Tony, like you said, like the keto, high fat, high protein, low carb thing works for you, you know, and that has probably a lot to do with your body type.
Yeah.
Mike, I think you're more of like a kind of a hybrid endo-meso, where you do well with carbs still, and you do use them for your training and just your body type and training alone. And then you got me, who's definitely, you know, more meso, and probably leans more towards, you know, meso-ecto than meso-endo. And I have a much varied diet and training cycle because I'm more of that middle ground guy, and I can do those other things. And my diet, you know, coincides respectively. So yeah, I definitely think that's part of it. And like Tony said, at the highest level, you're never going to have an ectomorph be a high jumper, you know, Olympic high jumper. Can they be a high jumper? Sure. Are they going to be a gold medalist? No. And I think that's something that you really need to understand when it comes to genetics. The best of the best, the peak are people who are genetically designed to be that. Usain Bolt was never going to be a powerlifter.
Exactly.
You know, but he's never going to be a long distance runner. He's built, you know, from a muscle body type, from his muscle fiber type, even to the shape of his body. Michael Phelps he's like the perfect example of a guy who's literally genetically predisposed to be good at what he's good at.
Okay.
You know, I just want to propose something, Chris, and your thought on it, because I haven't really heard it discussed and I've not read any research on it. One of the reasons why somebody like me may not need as many carbs, and I need some, don't get me wrong, I'm not a pure keto guy. I will get localized muscle fatigue on a pure keto, right? But to Chris's point, I can move more toward that direction. But I tend to have a hyperinsulinic response. It's my best guess to carbohydrates. Okay. Now I think that may do one of two things, or both. One, it may be because we know insulin is highly anabolic. It may be why, maybe it assists in putting muscle on me.
There's actually good research on that carbohydrates are important for muscle growth and putting on weight. Yeah. I mean,
without
like
question,
you said,
right? Or the insulin itself facilitating the muscle protein synthesis, Chris. So maybe
100%.
I eat one sweet potato, I skyrocket, you know, my insulin skyrockets.
And
The two advantages being it can help my muscle protein synthesis, and I might facilitate glycogen synthesis very effectively. Hence, I don't need as many carbohydrates, right? Because there's I don't know. I'm just asking this as a potential. However, number two, if I'm skyrocketing that insulin when I'm not active, I have to be more careful, perhaps, about lipogenesis.
Yes.
So go on.
Just even from a longevity standpoint, spiking insulin, spiking the mTOR pathway, you know, getting all that muscle protein is not a great thing for longevity. It's not a good thing for. So when we got to kind of, I think that we blur lines a lot when you read about these things and see YouTube videos and people are like, wow, well, you know, you want to, you know, insulin's important for growth, and we want to make sure that we get our ahead of our anabolic window. We're going to spike that insulin. We're going to use that, and we're going to get our leucine in there and hit that mTOR pathway so we can grow muscle. And then other people are like, no, that's bad. It causes cancer. It's not good. They're two different things. Yes. You know, performance and optimization are different than longevity and just being a regular person.
Oh, without question. Yeah.
So where your goals are now, you spiking your insulin with your carbs is not really something you want to do. If you want to put on muscle and you want to get bigger and you want to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, yeah, you probably have a great body type for that and a great enzymatic activity and physiological, you know, adaptation to do that. Where maybe I don't. You know, right. But you're not trying to do that now. So for you to limit your carbs makes complete sense.
Exactly. I've never tried to do it. I just think it's genetically the way I'm designed, right? Yeah. So I'm saying maybe because I do get that spike to the carb, the advantage, if you want to call it that, I don't, would be easily putting muscle on. Of course, it's fiber type related, but easily resynthesizing glycogen because of the post-training effects of that, right? And and then unfortunately, though, if you spike it in the absence of activity, being more inclined to put weight on. So just some things to think about, really. And I agree with you. Spiking insulin, other than maybe post-training, I don't think has any benefit. I think that's why the comorbidities are through the roof, because people spike it all day long and they're not even active. So, you know.
And I think to speak on a point that's completely unrelated, but the transitioning of athletes from being a professional athlete or training consistently to kind of like the retirement, like I think diet plays such a massive role in that, and changing that paradigm, having that paradigm shift of like, I don't have to hit the anabolic window right now. I don't need to spike insulin before I train and after. Because an athlete, we're spiking insulin all day long. We wake up, we're having a fast, we're like, boom, we're hitting our carbs in right away because I got to train later. Right before that workout, I'm hitting my carbs again, so I got energy for the workout. As soon as that workout's over, I'm literally putting my shake in while I'm still sweating, spiking that again. Getting ready for my next workout, I need my pre-workout spike, and then I need my post-workout spike. You know, we're spiking our insulin multiple times a day. And then they go from that lifestyle where you're training twice a day and you're constantly trying to get your carb numbers in to even just training once a day. It's going to dramatically change your carbohydrate needs and how much insulin spiking you really want to do.
Yep.
Okay. Great.
Really good.
Next slide, Tony. So you kind of already, brought this to mind, but like my point with this slide was about, okay, so we have the specificity of training, obviously, and we're all in agreement, like as a strength coach, we're just trying to do our part to assist the athlete through their training, whether MMA or boxing, but the real work is done in their skill sport. Mm-hmm. So with that said, the benefits of circuit training for me would be fair to say that we're incorporating a little more of the nervous system when we're implementing the weights at such a fast level of a high endurance pace. So we take like a massive squat, and then we go into, like, say, a plyometric activity, and then we do some other type of circuit with it. So we have the skill sport that does the specifics of what they need to do for endurance and cardiovascular work, but now we can take the weight training to enhance the nervous system effect as well. Is that fair to say?
I agree with you, Mike. So I think in terms of what you would do regarding the implementation of strength and or power would be to, first I look at it in a controlled environment where fighting is not, right? Because Chris has to respond to strikes, punch. He's going to throw a punch even if he's not optimizing the power behind that punch, because his ability or the time permitted to throw that punch may not be as great as we would like it for him to sit down and optimize it under those conditions. So my point to that is, one good thing is we can take the qualities and then isolate and get them away from the complexity of even sparring and exaggerate them beyond what they may be able to do in the fight itself, only because there's reservation in the fight. So a good example, what I mean to that is, if you put punching sensors in a boxer's glove, which has been done, you're never going to get the same maximum force output in a fight that you are when they're hitting a mitt.
Right.
Because Chris got to worry, if Chris is going to commit that big to that right hand, well, I got bad news for you. Somebody else is going to commit to something coming back.
So your point, Tony, perfect example, Conor McGregor when he fought Floyd Mayweather.
Okay, great.
Tremendously powerful athlete, known for his power in MMA.
Great point, Chris.
Goes in the boxing ring, can't crack an egg.
Exactly. Exactly. No, literally looked like he was using pillows in a pillow fight, because the way he was. Perfect point. Perfect point. So my point is, what do we do, Mike? We take a moment where Chris isn't worried about getting punched in the face, and we get to tax the nervous system and the musculoskeletal system and neuromuscular system beyond what he might be able to do in the fight, because nobody's going to punch him, so that we augment that quality, so when he needs it, it will be there. So unequivocally, that's how I view how we can help a fighter, right? Awesome. We train the quality in the absence of a threat. Like, so if I want somebody to be able to go and propulse in and out, step in, step back, you and I can exaggerate that quality in the absence of being threatened or somebody screaming instructions at him and somebody punching him back. So we exaggerate it. We make it clear. It's not going to work perfectly like that in the fight, obviously, but we've taken the time to move away from the threat of a fight and augment that quality. So I think that's how we can help. So when that one moment comes where Chris got somebody in trouble from a body shot, now he can sit the hell down on the right hand because that guy's in trouble. Now it's there. So that's how I do think we help. And, you know, and one thing regarding like a circuit versus specificity, then I'll let Chris finish this. The only reason why I think some type of circuit cardiorespiratory type of conditioning, which is often mocked, can be advantageous is that the fighter ages, they can't spar 3-4 times a week. And then they got, you know, this joint hurts. Yep. They got an injury in the rib. They can't get hit. They can't wrestle as much, you know, in MMA particularly. So there's 25 things they can't do that would augment their strength, power, speed, and cardiorespiratory endurance as they age. So the often mocked circuit of Metcon or cardiorespiratory conditioning can be a nice tool when you got somebody who's 34 years old in MMA and isn't in great shape like Chris, because most of them aren't. And, you know, they can barely walk and do the skill training. So that's where we can help as well. That's where a circuit, in my opinion, would have value for keeping their conditioning up without repetitive stress injury.
Mike, to your point of the circuit side, because Tony, I know how Mike trains, been training me for years, and I'm aware of how he trains as well. And he does put he pushes his pace even on his strength training, and you definitely do that with all the fighters. And so we're constantly moving. It becomes, and as we get closer to fight time, we really do turn them into circuits to really push the gas tank, push that deep cardio and conditioning set. But I think there is a place for just basic over distance training. I'm going to pull up one of my favorite books, and actually the first book that I ever read on the subject of training in college, Serious Training for the Endurance Athlete. So I was an endurance athlete, but for whatever reason, this interested in me in kind of sports science and training and getting to understand what triathletes went through and long distance work, because that I thought there was a lot of carryover into what my sports were. And there was a bunch of different, training variables. There was HIIT training, of course. They explained everything. That was my intro into sports science. But they had something called over distance, where they would basically low and slow, and just getting out and just going out and based on your own pace. And it was something that they kind of purported that everyone should do for base conditioning, basic aerobic capacity, basic, muscular mitochondria use and utilization, oxygen consumption, all these different things that everyone needs no matter what you are. So having kind of that low and slow over distance training where you're keeping your heart rate very low, and it's actually extremely boring training because your heart rate's staying low and you're just moving, and it's very long. I think that's important too, not just being so, specific to what you're doing. It's like, all right, well, I lift weights, so I'm just going to lift weights faster. That's going to get me in better shape. I don't know if that really works and carries over to true optimal or optimized, cardio fitness.
Right.
Agree. Okay. Cool. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite topics lately. I've been doing a lot of reading. I just actually finished up the book called The Performance Cortex. I don't know if any of you guys read it, but
I haven't.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Right.
So the brain has always been fascinating to me, to all of you guys as well. So who's in charge? So obviously we have this, cardiovascular physiological effect with the muscles need oxygen, and we have, the delivery of that to the system to maintain a certain effect. But eventually that's been shown that can get to a certain level that's minute, and the brain kicks in and says you can still go. Thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, these are very complex mechanisms, but technically, look, I've always said this, and I mean, it's a metaphor really, but nothing goes on in the human body without permission from the brain. And if it does, it's probably not very good. But the analogy I use with my students, and I don't really like to use it only because of the severity of it, but look, we all know what happens if you pinch or cut that spinal cord off at C3, C4. We're no longer worried about ESSC, oxygen extraction, Golgi tendons, muscle spindles, what fiber type, nothing goes on anymore. And you can almost barely breathe on your own. So my brief point to that is that, yes, the brain is running, it's running everything. And fatigue and pain perception is largely related to how it's processed in the brain. So we don't want to get carried away where we go things and say things with the mind. You can overcome anything, and I can jump off my sixth story and start flying. But we've seen it where performance is unequivocally related to the perception of either how much time is left at a given activity, and all of a sudden the physiological capacity changes, right? Or certainly the belief system in what can be done changes physiology. Now, exactly how does it do that? I'm not sure any of us know just yet. But using a boxing analogy, and Chris would elaborate on it far more than I, but how many times have any of us watched a fight and you hear 10 seconds left and all of a sudden somebody tees off?
Right.
But they looked tired. They looked fatigued.
Yeah.
So certainly when the brain knows or is aware of what it has to do in a certain period of time, we see a change at the periphery. That's just one of 50 different examples of how the brain can change physiology within reason.
So
but
to build
go
up
on, I'll let
time.
Chris augment on what it's really like when you're fighting.
So what do you just want to say something? So like you were saying, so the brain is obviously in control. We know it's the highest level of function. But from the books, they're talking about saying, so the body has this mechanism that's ongoing. And then, like you said, you hear this bell. And the brain all of a sudden now says, okay, we need to perform. So the brain is acting in a way maybe to control it and not obviously deplete you to a certain extent. There's always something in reserve. So the brain says, okay, go get it.
That's right.
That's a perfect segue to what my point was going to be. So I trained with Laird Hamilton at his house in Maui, and we did his XPE training system with Laird and his wife, Gabby Reese. And it's a lot of underwater training. So we would hold weights and you'd run underwater. You do jumps and plows and different things underwater while holding your breath. And some of these exercise bouts were pretty long, and they were underwater, and you're using mechanical energy. So you're using more oxygen as you're doing it. And one of the major things that they were thinking is, and they were telling us rather, and coaching us through, was that you always have more breath than you think. More than what your body tells you, you have a reserve, which is exactly what Mike said. And for me, I took that into thinking about what it is during competition, and why I've personally, in training and competition, everybody you talk to who trains with me knows that, like, I push, I work, I outwork everybody in the room. Part of it's my competitive nature. That's part of the mind thing. I want to beat everybody in there. But two, I think I have the ability, or I developed or trained the ability to understand that I've always got more left. And our brain is smarter than us, right? There's things going on that it's telling our body, and it's like Mike said, it is holding on to some reserves to when we get into that fight or flight moment. Survival outweighs pride. When your body and brain think you're dying, you don't care about anything else but survival. Being able to tap into that notion and that reserve, and understanding that I can go a little bit more. I can go more because there is more in there. My body doesn't want me to use it. My brain doesn't want to let me know that I have that in me, because it's saving it for a dire last-ditch effort. Being able to tap into that, I think, is what you see when you see those athletes do things that are absolutely amazing. And you hear the announcer yell, "He's pulling it from nowhere." That's exactly where it's coming from. The athlete's pulling that from the survival state that's deep within their core as an organism. And I think high-level athletes and people who have been stressed and have been in positions of dire straits have an ability to access that far beyond that of regular people.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Chris. You can override the limbic response with the prefrontal cortex and say, you could literally, okay, it's cool. We're good. Relax. Literally, we're good. You can quell the parts of the brain that are responding, that are gaining the feedback, the cardiorespiratory center, and everything that's going back, that's showing oxygen deprivation, low glucose reserves, low carbohydrate reserves, and you literally can override those, which are much more responsive systems. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but Chris gave the perfect example, and just say we're good.
Right.
We're good. And by doing that, you can tap into that reserve, quell the, if you will, almost like an amygdala flight response, take the fatigue, and quell the danger signs and the negative thoughts and the desire that it's given you to stop, because that's what it's doing, and just comfort it with experience, with training, and with having been there before. But that does take practice.
We do a workout on the gym. It's called Box and Rumble in Bed-Stuy with Andre Rozier and I think Gary Stark Sr. has also been one of the guys who kind of developed this idea. And it's horrible. It's an absolutely brutal workout, and it's taxing everything. I mean, the cardiovascular, like your heart rate. I've monitored my heart rate during it. I'm in the 195 to 198. Multiple times throughout. My calorie burn is near 2,000 for a 90-minute workout.
It's hard for you to get that high.
Absolutely insane. And I'm known. They call me the Rumble King because I push harder than everybody. I'm trying to beat everybody, and everybody's trying to beat me. And afterwards, a lot of the guys laugh. Like, man, how do you do that? And I go, when you see the light, go towards it. And it's a joke, but it's really not. Like, I just understand. Like, I can push myself to the point where it's like my heart's telling me to stop because it's going to beat out of my chest, but I'm like, you know what? We're good. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep pushing. So, when you get yourself to that edge and that limit where it's like, all right, I need to puke or stop or whatever, my body is telling me it's going to shut down. Understand that it doesn't have to. You can rewire what's going on and tell your body, like Tony said, relax, chill out. Yeah. We got this. Go ahead.
We've been here, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So that's why you're one of the top 1% of the athletes in the world. And the other thing that we do with our military is we're pushing them in the elite forces of recon Marines, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Green Berets, all the elite fighting groups. They're pushing that capacity of their brain to take it to the 1% of the individuals that can hang there and withstand the stress of the body and overcome it.
That's what BUDS is, right? That's what Navy SEAL training is. Yeah. You're breaking guys and bringing them to the point of no return, and so they can realize that, hey, listen, I'm not going to die.
Right, very few. So
and one thing I just add to that too, though, I think that when there's money at stake for an athlete, the goal is not to tempt performance like you do in the Navy SEALs, or the goal is to optimize it. So make sure you get the fuel you need. Make sure you get the sleep you need. You know, if you want to go the other way and go underwater with 3 days of no food, then go be in the Special Forces. If you want to win your $3 million purse, please sleep, eat, and do everything you have to.
Right. Guys, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I've been hydrating, so we'll be right back.
So,
all right, we'll finish up with one more slide. What do you think, man?
Yeah, it's cool. So tracking heart rate, should we wait for Chris or you want to keep going?
Yeah, we could start, right?
Okay. Yeah, so tracking heart rate, Tony, there's a big thing like Chris was mentioning as well about, making sure you're in a certain heart rate zone. Benefits to obviously are about what? So what's the importance of making sure we understand our heart rate when we're training athletes?
I think one of the things that we would look at, Mike, from a performance perspective is obviously that, the heart rate and the ranges change in fighting according to, like, we're using fighting as an example, but it could be any sport due to a multitude of factors, right? So I think the key thing is, here's what I like using heart rate for when it comes to sports and performance. And, I don't have a great breadth of knowledge in other sports, and I've worked with athletes and all in mostly fighting. So a couple ways I like to use it. Obviously, over the course of a camp, let's first detect how resting heart rate is doing, right? Because generally speaking, if the athlete is waking up in the morning with an improved or a steady resting heart rate, that's a pretty good sign over the duration of weeks. Some indicator that an athlete might be overtraining could be, that resting heart rate is not improving when all the cardiorespiratory, neuromuscular, and dietary practices say that it should. So I think that, knowing heart rate and resting from that perspective is really, really important. Chris already talked to it, and we'll let him elaborate on it further. But I think from a conditioning perspective, in most sports, you can't always dictate, all right, it's always going to happen in this range or in this zone, because we don't know how the event's going to go. It could be going great and heart rate may be a little lower. It could be going bad. That may elevate it. But I think that utilizing heart rate as a mechanism to, indicate very generally autonomic nervous system balance is really important. So Chris said it earlier, and he gets some crazy numbers. So one of the is really to look at sympathetic, parasympathetic efficiency. So if you're using fighting as an example, because that's what most of us are involved in, and somebody goes to 180 in whether it's a 5-minute MMA round or a 3-minute boxing round, and Chris had the highest rate of decline I've ever seen. It was like 40%. I've never seen that before. But generally, watching the rate of the decline does give us some indication to everything we've talked about. The rate of decline. So if he's at 180 and he goes down to 120 in 1 minute, not only does he have great sympathetic, parasympathetic influence and balance, he's in great physical conditioning. He's got great oxygen extraction. The round probably went relatively well, because if it didn't, I doubt he'd get that much recovery, okay? He's calm, he's relaxed, he's cogent. So what the heart rate is showing us with this capacity to recovery is not just that he's in great shape, but that, you know what? Things may be going pretty well during the event itself. So I've monitored guys, for example, in MMA, and they're great wrestlers.
Right.
And you could put them on the ground statically. They could be holding somebody in a double leg against the cage, but they're not taking them down yet. But that should send heart rate through the roof. You can't breathe well. You have an isometric contraction. But no, you know what? That's their home. They're wrestling. You could put 2 guys on them down there, and their heart rate goes to 130. Now stand them up. Nothing's going on, and they're 170. Why? Because they're not at home there. They're not efficient there. So I think heart rate not tells us is an indication to everything you guys just talked about. Not just your physical conditioning, but it's insight into the mind and what that fighter sees something as. Okay, wrestling, hey, put me down here all day. Stand me up, oh, I'm worried about getting hit. I don't like getting hit. I'm not fast. I got poor defense. And now all of a sudden everything changes. So why does that matter? Well, it gives us some insight into where we could mentally, not just physically, help our athlete. Heart rate is an indication of the brain too, not just the periphery.
Right. Agree.
Your thoughts on all of that, Chris? Resting and
heart rate.
Yeah, I heard. I put it on speaker so I could hear you when you were speaking. Yeah, absolutely. So I've been monitoring my heart rate since the early 2000s. It's something that I thought was a really interesting aspect of sports science and quantitatively tracking your progression and using it for a host of other things. So now essentially, I mean, once you start tracking your heart rate for yourself as an athlete, you figure out your feelings, your perceived exertion, and where your heart rates really fall. I don't need to really wear a heart rate monitor anymore. I do it more just for tracking for other reasons. I know how hard I'm working. I can feel it. And I'm pretty in tune with my mind-body connection on that. But where I may not be that in tune are certain things like recovery. Tony mentioned this, checking my heart rate in the morning. If I check my heart rate first thing in the morning, I'm falling a pretty tight range of what my resting heart rate is. And when it's elevated, something's up. And for the most part, I can tell if I'm elevated that it's going to be usually one of 3 things, or a couple of them. I'm sick, or I'm getting sick. I'm overtrained, or or just didn't sleep well the night before. If I don't sleep well the night before, which can be all the other things as well. So that will throw off my heart rate in the morning, like my baseline, my resting heart rate. And I've had athletes ask me, Dennis Bermudez, for example, was like, what do I want to get my resting heart rate to? And Tony kind of alluded to this earlier. It's like, it doesn't matter. Whatever your resting heart rate is your resting heart rate. That's not the goal. Just like getting your VO2 max is not the goal if you're a fighter. Yes.
Chris, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. With the heart rate variability now, so say you have low variability for a few days, which isn't good. Mm-hmm. Now, have you ever trained and like you woke up in the morning and like, let me backtrack. Like, you wake up in the morning, your heart variability is low for a few days. All of a sudden you say, I got to train. You get there, and all of a sudden now you start feeling really good. So have you ever just disregarded that heart rate variability and say, you know what, I'm pushing through it, and all of a sudden you have a great workout of the day?
100%. Pretty much every single time my heart rate, I pretty much always disregard whatever it is.
Right.
So I've worked with Omega Wave, and I've also I've been using my Polar now, and this actually tracks heart rate variability while I sleep as well. So I have a marker of my heart rate variability every single day of my life now.
Some people live and die by that variability. It was giving me like, my variability is low, I'm not gonna train today. I'm like, well, maybe you just had a bad morning.
Yeah, I don't. If I'm feeling shit and my watch variability is really low, then maybe I'd be like, you know what, I'm going to pull back, or I'm going to take off. I'm going to listen to my body before I listen to
First statement. Yep.
Yeah, before I listen to numbers on a watch, or any kind of measurement. So yeah, no, I don't think it's a good idea to live and die by those numbers, because like you said, I've had days where I woke up or I didn't sleep well, or I was traveling, and I was like, man, I'm beat. I don't want to get this workout in, but I got to do it. So I go, and then I have a great session. And I have other opposite too. I have days where my variability is fantastic and I slept really good, and then I go to the gym and I feel like shit. So I take it with a grain of salt. I think it's important looking at it on a whole rather than as a specific once
a trend, right?
Right, more of a trend over time. And I think that's much more important. Like I said, like even the VO2 max, it's transient. It's for that moment. Yeah. You're taking a snapshot of all the physiological processes that are going on in your body, because heart rate is linked to everything, right? Your heart rate variability, your breath rate, your sleep, all those different things. So for me now, heart rate is much more of protecting myself from overtraining and to kind of monitor my recovery. So understanding that, my heart rate's not always going to be low in the morning, but there is a consistency to it. If I have a morning where it's 39, that's not out of the ordinary, but also I've had mornings where it's 47, so it's a pretty wide range. But for the majority of the time, I'm in the low 40s. So 41, 42 is about where my resting heart rate is. So I know when I'm around there, things are good, because not too low is not good either. If it's really low one morning, something's off as well. And I want to be cognizant of that. And maybe that's not a day where I go out and try and beat my record. PR, don't PR in a day when your variability is low. Don't PR in a day when maybe your heart rate's elevated. Don't PR in a day when or don't try to go for it, because you're risking risking injury, and you're risking kind of failing what you're trying to do, or performance based. So in that sense, that's when I will listen to the numbers. If my heart rate variability is really low for a few days, I'm like, I'm not going to go out there and do that boxing rumble workout and put myself in the red.
Right. Tony, question for you. Can people looking to build muscle mass, like say a bodybuilder or physique athletes, can tracking your heart rate assist them into building muscle mass easier? Is it an important thing to look at?
Wow, you know what? Really good question, Mike. Yeah. I'll concede that probably I wouldn't know if I'd have the best answer regarding the heart rate and where it is during the training itself. But I do think what we know to optimize any physiological process, such as recovery, muscle protein synthesis, increasing strength, cross-sectional area, all of that, I do think that an indication of HRV as a trend and resting heart rate might be more valuable. I couldn't say that I'd be qualified to answer what the role of the exercise heart rate during muscle hypertrophy routines might be. I honestly don't know, but I think is an indicator of sympathetic and parasympathetic response, certainly by, like Chris was just saying, morning heart rate and HRV over time. It might be a valuable indicator, because to optimize hypertrophy, to optimize strength, in the end, reduce stress and be healthy and get good sleep.
Yes.
So it may be, right, Chris? It might be.
I mean, when do you grow?
That's my point.
You grow in your you grow in your
value in its correlation, right?
Yeah, you grow in recovery. If you're building muscle, you're breaking down during training, and then the growth happens as long as your diet is on point, as long as your hormone levels are right. It happens during recovery. So I think that would be a direct indication of related to heart rate in terms of muscle growth. Are you recovering properly? And a good way to monitor that is by checking your heart rate. So yeah, I mean, we don't have any science to this, obviously we're talking about it, but it makes sense that if your heart rate's on point, then your recovery is on point, and that will aid in muscle growth. Yeah,
and I'll add one thing, Mike, because I think it's a brilliant question. And I'm not a hypertrophy expert. But we do know that even to date, I still think we believe a little bit shorter rest interval, right? Compound, a little higher volume is inducing more hypertrophy than a lower repetition and a longer rest. Am I correct?
That's what I've always believed too. But
yeah, and the data kind of suggests that. However, so that would be heart rate related. So in better words, to some extent, we might be able to assert or hypothesize that a heart rate and resistance training of 120, I'm throwing out hypotheticals,
right.
110 to 130, 140 might induce, and it's not due to the heart, but it may be due to the growth hormone release or the associated volume and the constant neurological stimulus, but that heart rate may be more inclined to induce hypertrophy than a heart rate that is 95 to 110 on average, because the rest intervals are longer and the total repetition of the set is shorter. So I think there'd be some correlation there. I think it's a great question.
Yeah. Okay.
Worth a study.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. All right. I guess we'll do one more slide, Tony, so I'll wrap it up.
We'll do one more slide and close it out. And to anybody who may actually watch this was not intended on being a posted video, but considering that we're working on it for 2 hours, I think it's going to be a posted video.
Oh, definitely. Me too. You got to send it to me right away, Tony.
I know, yes.
Just to kind of sum it up together, ideas for training. I mean, there's a million things we could talk about more, but we talked about duration, types of exercises, rest periods, frequency. And the other topics we didn't get into was actually watching Lance Armstrong on Sunday night on ESPN. If you saw the new one, 30 for 30.
Not yet.
There's obviously, other compound factors we can use to enhance the cardiovascular system to sustain performance, but we'll get into maybe another topic one day. But these are variables you agree with. We always have to kind of manipulate to improve our cardiovascular performance, correct?
Yeah, if I could just jump in and just on one point that I've kind of been thinking about throughout this whole thing, especially when we're talking about body types and just cardiovascular fitness, I really think people think of cardio, they think of like low and slow and long duration workouts, and I really think there's a place for HIIT training and sprinting and if that's what your body's more accustomed to, like Tony or Mike or yourself, like if you're more comfortable getting out and doing a 20-minute or 25-minute, with your warm-up, whatever sprint routine as part of your, as your cardio rather than doing over distance, I 100% feel like the carryover for that, it definitely is worth it. I talk to Dr. Corey Peacock all the time, and he talks about running, and he's like, he calls it slamming his feet against the ground because he's just not a runner. He's much more of an explosive athlete, much like you guys. He puts on muscle very easily. He's a bigger guy. And he lives and dies by running sprints. He just loves running sprints. As long as you get a good warm up, as we all are aging, and get out there and get your sprints in, I really think that counts as cardio. And I think people really get away from that. And I think it's probably more beneficial because of cardiovascular, getting the heart rate up. But I think a combination of some low and slow training, maybe once a week, where you're doing it for a long period of time, just getting your body used to being continual, but then bouts of sprints and high intensity stuff where you're getting your heart rate up over and over and over again, I think makes a ton of sense.
Chris, couldn't agree more. The most alive to this day I ever feel, not very good at it, I was good at it shorter, but is running a 200 or a 400 meter.
Yeah.
Okay, now 400 meters long.
Yeah, it sucks.
It's got awful. However, it is the most alive I ever feel. The 200, because 100, I'm not getting enough cardio. That would be a good run for me, or 60, unless you just keep going back and forth. But because I'm designed to sprint or run all out better for a shorter period of time, I could wholeheartedly agree that it's a viable method of cardiorespiratory conditioning. It's a wonderful neuromuscular method of conditioning. In the 200, you could build lower extremity muscle. And to Chris's point, okay, so you run the 200 meter and you fast walk in between them. That's cardio. Yep. And it's a great method of cardiorespiratory conditioning.
Especially in terms of what your heart rate's doing, especially in terms of your caloric burn, your oxygen consumption during that time. That's 100% cardio.
Absolutely. And to Chris's point, you might say, well, Tony, why don't you go run 3 miles? Because that would be more wear and tear in a negative capacity on my performance than me running the 200 meter all out and then walking and taking a 30-second rest as an example. So why then would I want to, if I was a competitive athlete, let's say like Chris, why would I want to do unnecessary wear and tear to augment my cardiovascular capacity when I can get very good benefit in something that is neuromuscularly or structurally much more compatible with who I am?
I'm currently doing something pretty stupid. I'm doing 5 miles a day every day in a row, based on my buddy Jake Bonacci did it for 50 days straight during COVID. He said 5 miles a day keeps COVID away. And it's really, really kind of funny and cool kind of thing that he recently got into marathon running. So he was running quite a bit. I'm not a runner. I run. I like to run. I'm a good runner. But I'm telling you right now, 5 miles a day every day sucks. I am not enjoying it at all. I realize how little I like actual running because I normally break everything up. I'll do 5 miles once a week, maybe.
Right.
For the most part, I do a lot more sprint work. I do a lot more, fast 5Ks, things like that, or hill sprints, stuff like that. So I break it up so often that it keeps the running for me fresh. Now that I'm doing the same thing every day and I'm coming up on day number 5, I hate it. Absolutely hate it. It is not fun. And I know there's not much carryover to my actual competitive training whatsoever. Like, I'm not doing this to be a better boxer. I'm doing it as just kind of like a test. I want to do it 7 days in a row just to do it. And mechanically, I'm a very good mechanical runner, so it's not going to damage me. But yeah, no, when you mix up your runs and different cardio activities, I think not only is it great for your body in terms of not being too specified and doing everything, but it's good for your mind too. You don't feel that even if you don't like to run, there's so many kinds of ways to run. Saying you don't like to run is being, I don't like vegetables. Well, there's a lot of vegetables out there. Or I don't like fruit. There's a lot of fruit out there. Yeah. I don't like running. There's a lot of ways to run. So, or I don't like cardio. There's a lot of ways to do cardio. So being able to mix those up, I think, is really beneficial for people who maybe don't like to do cardio and want to optimize themselves as just human athletes.
Cool. With that was very informative, guys. I really appreciate your input on this topic, and it's something I hold very dear to my heart. And so, until next time.
Yeah, I hope. Well done, well constructed, Mike. I thought you directed to subject matter is great, and hopefully we can get this out and some people enjoy it.
We'll do. So, Tony, you're just going to save it, and then you can send it to Chris and I. Okay.
Yeah, I'll post this on my YouTube. We'll get this going. Awesome stuff, guys. Appreciate it. This is a lot of fun.
Hold on 1 sec there. Let me end recording.
Yep. You save.
Let me get to mine. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I gotta get out to Brooklyn. I got training.
All right, cool, guys. By the way, too, just quickly, if you hear anybody who needs any kind of work, let me know. I gotta make some money. I'm getting killed. My tenant died. Oh, I have no training on the side, so I don't care. I'll do Excel files or dig ditches. So let me know.
All right, Tony.
Let's get to work then. Well,
yeah. If you hear anything, in any capacity, let me know.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right, guys.
All right.
Cool.
All right, gents.
All right.
Great, guys.
All right, Tony. Thanks. Later.